one of the reasons a lot of these meetings fail. People go in there underprepared, or they go in there talking about themselves rather than confirming what their intelligent suppositions are. I mean, people talk about doing discovery, but no decent $5,000, $10,000 an hour C-level executive is going to invite you in to ask them lots of daft questions. You've got to go in with propositions that they confirm or deny. So you've got to say, okay, in our experience, people like you have this sort of issue, and these are the consequences and these are the causes. Is that an issue for you? And if you've hit the nail on the head, you've got a conversation. But very few people know how to do that.
You're listening to the Sales Today podcast, and I'm your host, Fred Copestake. On this podcast, we explore how sales professionals can develop a modern approach to winning business, the application of virtual selling techniques, how to create meaningful business relationships, and much more. Why not take our free collaborative selling scorecard to see how your sales approach suits today's environment? You'll find a link in the show notes. And welcome to this episode of the Sales Today podcast, where I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Hall, who is an expert in selling at C-level. Now, I know this not only because he says so on his LinkedIn site, but I've had the pleasure of working with him over the past couple of months to develop some training to help people get better at this. So it's still the real deal. Welcome, Steve.
Welcome, Fred. And just to prove it's about sea level, here we are at sea level with the waves rolling gently in the background.
Steve has, every time we've spoken, tried to make me jealous by dropping the fact that he's in Australia, where it's lovely and sunny, and I'm stuck in the middle of the UK.
Well, at least you can watch the football at a decent time.
I don't even watch football, do I?
Yeah, but I do.
The rugby. So, Steve, we need to get into this because there's a lot of stuff which I want to cover based on the things that we've been talking about, and I'd love to try and encapsulate in this kind of half hour. Let's start off with just the basic, the obvious one. What is selling at C-level? What are we talking about?
It's basically selling to the people at the top of the tree, or as high up the tree as you need to sell to in order to not get knocked down at the last minute by someone saying, I'm not paying for that. I won't bore you with stories I've told before about how I lost big deals because I didn't have the ear of the person at the top and they made a last minute decision to do something else. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was talking to one of my clients, one of the account managers at one of my clients, who's been hanging out for a deal for 3 months now because the CEO is not convinced. And because he hadn't involved the CEO early on, but the CEO's got the final say-so, he hasn't got that relationship, so he hasn't got a huge amount of leverage. I think they'll probably get it over the line. But if they'd started with the CEO, understood what the CEO wanted, and then gone back to him to sign off, it would have been a damn sight easier. And I don't know if you know Craig McLaughlin, who was a LinkedIn voice, and he wrote Birth of a Salesman, and he's a win-loss expert here in Australia. He's managing director of Trinity Consulting. His win-loss reviews found that one of the top 3 reasons for deals being lost was lack of engagement at executive level. So C-level means whoever the most senior person is that is involved in your deal. If it's a small to medium company, it's probably the CEO, CFO. If it's Twitter, it's probably not Elon Musk. It might be the country manager.
Yeah. Okay. So is it different then from selling in other ways, shapes, or forms?
In some ways, it's the same. In some ways, it's different. The thing is that different people care about different things. So you need to meet all their needs. And the most important needs, the most important desires and wants are those of the person that signs the check, that approves of the deal at C-level or at board level. And so if you meet all the needs of the users and the middle management, but you don't meet the needs of the people at the top, you won't get the deal. It's as simple as that. So you need to understand what they care about, how to influence them, how to get to them. And because of who they are, they're often harder to get to, So you need to be able to get them and understand them to be able to make sure that you know what they want, and therefore you can give them what they want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly comes across in the stuff we've been talking about over the last couple of months. people might find it easier to talk to folk that they're used to talking to about their, what they do. But when you start thinking about what these guys care about, it is different, and you've got to understand that stuff. And then, again,
I'll give you another example. A while back, I had a customer that sold the fancy machines. I think they're to neurologists. They did some sort of brain scan, and they brought out a new machine, and the neurologists loved it. They absolutely loved it. And they were going around showing them how it was better than the old machine, and how it was much better than the competitors, and how it would help the neurologists. And the neurologists all wanted to buy it. But the neurologists aren't the one who make the budget decisions. And they weren't competing with other manufacturers of the same type of machine. They were competing with a new cancer treatment, or a new wing in a hospital, or increasing the wages of the nursing staff, because all of those were different calls on the budget. So they had to find a way. They had to find a way to influence the CEOs of hospitals and the CFOs of hospitals, who had completely different objectives to the neurologists who were gagging for it.
Yeah, your competition suddenly becomes very, very different, doesn't it? And again, what these guys are caring about, we've got to understand that well.
Indeed, in that particular instance, one of the guys went to the CEO of a hospital in after I'd done some coaching, went to the CEO of a hospital in Melbourne and said, "Look, there's another hospital opening down the road. Are you concerned about competition from that hospital?" And the guy said, "Yeah, we're really concerned." And he said, "Well, one of the things that will attract better doctors and attract more patients is if you can get this machine all the top neurologists want." "Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting." So he hit the right note, but it wasn't by talking about this machine's better than that machine, and it'll do operations faster, or you lose less blood. It was about it'll help you compete with the hospital down the road.
Yeah, a good example of that. So another one, you told me some pretty shocking numbers of the number of execs, or the percentage of execs that think that meetings they have with salespeople are a waste of time. Can you just remind them? And can I just say, a warning for people who might be listening to this, stood up, just sit down, because it's not good, this.
Well, you said a set of numbers, and it is a set of numbers, because first of all, it's actually, unless you know what you're doing, it's pretty hard to get a meeting with a senior executive. They guard their time jealousy. Their time could easily be worth, half an hour could be worth $1,000 or $2,000 to their company, compared when you look at how they're compensated and what else they could be doing. So getting a meeting is not that easy. So the last thing that you want to do when you do get a meeting is screw it up. And I think it was a Forrester group did a survey about 5 years ago, and they spoke to people who sell at C-level, and they also spoke to C-level executives, and they asked them the same question. After a meeting, how valuable do you think meetings are? And the C-level executives, 85% of the time, they said that a salesperson brought no value whatsoever to the meeting. It was worth their time. But when you ask the salespeople the same question, 80% of them said, "Oh, no, it went really well." So not only are the prospects, the senior executives, seeing that the meetings have got no value, the people selling to them don't understand that they're screwing up.
Wow, those numbers are shocking, aren't they? What's going on then? I mean, we could sort of dwell on those and sort of give salespeople a kick in. I don't really want to do that. We need to raise that awareness that potentially what you're doing isn't right. So what do you think some of the mistakes are that people are making that is causing that reaction for the execs?
Well, there's a number of mistakes, obviously. The first thing is they're targeting the wrong people. I mean, if you're targeting if you normally deal with, I don't know, the head of accounts, and you want to go up the tree to the CFO, or maybe the COO, or even the CEO, that's great. They're actually easy to find, because everyone knows who the CEO, the CFO, the COO are. So it's not difficult to identify the right people. A bit different to trying to find head of accounts payable, for instance. So that bit's easy, but getting them is a challenge. So what you don't want to do is get a meeting with the CFO of an organization that's never going to buy your stuff because they're not a good target. So the first thing is to get your targets right. Another example. I was talking to someone that was targeting accounts receivable, companies in accounts receivable doing not doing claims and rebates. And they had a list of people to target. And I went through it and I said, well, look, you've got insurance companies on there and health companies on there. They don't have rebates. So what's the point of trying to get to speak to them about rebates when they don't have them? I mean, that's bleeding obvious. And yet so many people target companies that are never going to buy them in the first place. And when you think that a meeting with a C-level executive can cost anything from $3,000 to $5,000 when you add up all the things that go into it, if you're chucking 80% of them down the drain because they're the wrong people, you're wasting an awful lot of money. So step one is targeting the right people. Step two is understanding what they want so you can get a message to them. And we have a huge amount of debate about what's the best way for emails or cold calling or LinkedIn. The issue isn't so much how you get the message to them, although it is important. The big issue is what is that message? And the broader your message, the less specific. And the less specific, the less likely it is to cut through. So if you're selling to someone at the top of the tree, presumably it's worth a lot of money because you're not going to talk to a CFO about something that's going to cost them, $5,000 a year and they don't get involved in. You sell that much lower. If you're talking to a CFO or a CEO, you're talking about, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 deals or more. So it's worth putting in an effort to get to the right people and to get the message right. So you can't sell to C-level at scale. You sell to C-level on a one-on-one basis, but it's worth it because when you win a deal, it's a heap of money. So the next thing is getting the right message to get you that meeting. And then the next question is, how do you get that message to them? And we talk about that a lot in the things we're doing together, and there's many different ways. I did a webinar this morning with Paul Watts on referrals, and referrals is a brilliant way to get to them if you know how to use referrals. And then the next thing is, okay, I've got the meeting. How do I handle the meeting? How do I prepare for it? What do I do with it? Because the last thing you want to do is walk through the door with your laptop under your arm and sit plonk down in front of them and start talking about your latest widget when you don't really know enough about them to start talking. Because that's one of the reasons a lot of these meetings fail. People go in there underprepared, or they go in there talking about themselves rather than confirming what their intelligent suppositions are. I mean, people talk about doing discovery, but no decent $5,000, $10,000 an hour C-level executive is going to invite you in to ask them lots of daft questions. You've got to go in with propositions that they confirm or deny. So you've got to say, okay, in our experience, people like you have this sort of issue, and these are the consequences and these are the causes. Is that an issue for you? And if you've hit the nail on the head, you've got a conversation. But very few people know how to do that.
Wow, you make that all sound reasonably easy. However,
it's simple. It isn't easy.
The structure and the procedures are simple, absolutely, but then doing it well and really starting to understand that stuff is where the magic starts to happen, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, I like the cryptic crossword as an analogy. I used to do the Telegraph crossword, but when I first started, I had absolutely no idea how to do it, because I just didn't know the techniques. And then some of my flatmates did show me, this is how an anagram works, and this is a run through, and you get to know the way to solve a cryptic crossword. Now that doesn't make solving a particular crossword easy, but necessarily easy, but you know how to go about doing it. Whereas if you haven't been shown that, then you've got absolutely no chance. And it's the same with trying to sell at C-level. If you know the principles, you know how to go about doing it. There's no guarantee you'll get that meeting and get a deal. But if you don't know them, it's guaranteed you won't.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and I saw you post that. I can't do them. I don't know how to. But my mum, who was a native Spanish speaker, learned how to do it, and so she could finish the bloody Telegraph one.
Well, in that post I gave you, in that post I showed you how to do 2 of the clues. But
then it's a mindset thing, because I can't be bothered.
It is a mindset. You need to. Well, that's right.
But the reason I'm saying mindset thing, not just be facetious, but there's a mindset also, isn't there, about being successful in selling at C-level, which has got some various components. And I wonder if part of it is that sometimes the salesperson can be their own worst enemy, in that they perceive these people in being so much more superior to them that's kind of always destined for failure, because that's all going to come across, and they're not going to have the right kind of relationship and ability to present that supposition.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's probably 2 mindsets that are wrong. One is the overly humble, where you think, oh, they're big and important, and who am I, just a salesperson? And the thing to remember there is that you might not know nearly as much of them breadth-wise and about their company, but hopefully you know at least as much and probably more than them about the specific business issue that you're helping them solve. And you obviously know more about your product, but they don't care about your product or your service, but they do care about a particular problem. So if there's a particular problem that you know they've got, and you go to them saying, we know you've got this problem, or you're likely to have this problem. If you have, we know what causes it, we know how to solve it, we know how to give you all the benefits that you get from solving it. Then you're on an equal footing with them because you've got something they want. I've got a friend, Jacques Schemas, who's president of selling to executives, but he used to be a CFO of Berkshire and a whole heap of really big companies and banks in, I think, Boston Bank. And he said when he was a worldwide CFO, he loved good salespeople coming in because they could help him solve problems, and they worked for free until he bought something. But you've got to be there to help them with something they care about, which means you've got to know what they care about.
Yeah, that was the first thing, the overly humble. What was the second mindset?
Overly stupid or overly arrogant. Going in, talking about how great you are, what your new office is, how many customers you've got. I did some work with one of the largest software companies in the world, and I got them a heap of meetings with senior executives in banks and credit unions here in Australia. And that was, at those days, I was helping people get meetings. I wasn't so much helping them understand how to handle the meetings, and we transcribed these calls. We had someone on the phone actually typed as they went, and I read the transcript, and it was terrible. We got the meetings on the basis of we can help you to increase your number of home loan customers, which was what we cared about. Then they're going, oh, hello, I'm so-and-so from big important company in America, and we've got all of these customers all around the world that aren't local Australian banks, and we're this big and important people, and my job is to deal with you medium-sized banks and sell you all this digital stuff. I mean, it was just absolutely all about them. It was terrible. And that's what people do. They go in and talk about themselves and how great they are without understanding, without verifying, without validating. And people just look at them, and if they're polite, they give them half an hour and kick them out. And if they're impolite, they do what one of Jacques' bosses used to do, which was get his EA to come in. Whenever there was a salesman, he got his EA to come in after 2 minutes and say, oh, you've got a board meeting. And if the salesman hadn't impressed them, within 2 minutes, he says, oh, I'm sorry, I've got to take this. And that was it.
Yeah. It's funny. I wonder if, it doesn't really work for anyone, does it? Going in and trying to say how great you are. But I wonder if it kind of gets compounded when you're talking to C-level, if you don't understand this and you think, oh, I've got to really show off because I've got to really try and impress them. So I'm going to tell them even more about us and try and boast even kind of stronger. And it's like, well, it's going to work even worse than it would do.
Well, the thing is that even though they're more intelligent, that's rubbish, of course. You look at some of the CEOs around the world, some of the most famous CEOs around the world. Some of the most famous presidents of countries around the world, they're obviously mentally deficient. So you can't assume that somebody who's in a senior position is necessarily any better than you. I mean, the world is full of examples of leaders who are, pardon my French, bloody hopeless. But they're human beings, right? So on a one-on-one level, they're no better than you, although a lot of them might think they are. So you need to look at them as human beings who are just people. But you also need to understand that they're busy, they've got a lot of time, and they need you to get to the point. They need you to basically say, we've done our research, we know that you're this big, these are your customers, these are your issues, and people that we deal with that, like you, usually have this issue, and this issue. Or alternatively, in your annual report, you say that these and these are two of your biggest risks. We can help you mitigate those risks, or whatever it might be based upon what you've learned. You don't go in there saying, tell me your biggest problems or what keeps you awake at night. You say, if you're like my mate Fred, who I talked to last week, who's just in another company like yours, what keeps him awake at night is the thought of being sued by the government because there was a cyber attack on his data. Is that something you're worried about?
No, yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, tell me your biggest problems. What keeps you awake at night? Again, don't ask them anyway. I mean, whoever you're talking to, they are particularly good questions, are they? Okay, so we're thinking about some of the mistakes that people make. You've been giving some kind of little quick solutions to that as well. And a lot of this is to do with research. It's this depth of understanding. And this stuff, I don't think we can emphasize this hard enough. It can't be circumvented. That is where your value is going to come from, isn't it? So are there any I'm gonna ask you a question I know you're gonna hate, but for a bit of fun. Are there any hacks that you can give us for research?
Absolutely. Get someone else to do it. It's easy. Find someone. It depends what you sell, but if you want to research a company and you're in the UK, you do what you've got. You've got some interns working with you to help you do things. Find someone that's got half a brain. Say, okay, this is what I need you to find for me. Go and look at the annual report. Go and look on the web. Look on the Facebook page. Look for newspaper articles in them. Look for this, this, and this, and come back and tell me. That's an easy hack. And if you
That has
if
been
you
the
mean
best
like
piece of advice I've ever heard. Get someone else to do it. That's awesome.
well, one of the there's been a thing for a long time about SDRs shouldn't be doing research because that'll stop them doing the calls, and there's a degree of truth in that. But SDRs doing calls without research, you waste of time anyway. But I'm not a big fan of SDRs. I think that someone somewhere back about 20 years ago said, our account managers are far too big and important to do the prospecting themselves. Let's get someone. They're far too big and important not to be selling. So let's take some of the load off them. What can we get other people to do? Or we'll get other people to do the most difficult thing that there is, which is opening a conversation with customers. And we'll give it to junior people who don't pay much, which is bloody stupid. Whereas if they'd said, well, what we can do is we can get someone else to do all of the administration and all of the paperwork, and we'll get someone else to do their research for them. And then maybe we get someone to find leads for them, but we arm those people with proper research that someone that's good at research does. Then, that's what I mean. People that win Nobel Prizes don't do all their research.
Listening to this, and they want to correct me. Be very happy with that. I think it was Salesforce that originally did it. Maybe, and of course, so everybody chased after it to try and copy them, and it was kind of successful for a bit. I think it isn't now, and I think even the Salesforce guy said he's not sure it's the right structure and way of doing things, which has thrown everyone into turmoil. So hey,
the big problem with a lot of sales stuff is everyone wants a hack, and everyone looks for what's successful and copies it. So how often do you see on LinkedIn, oh, I've got an email that works every time. If anyone wants it, comment below, and you get 8 million comments, and you send it out, and then all of a sudden 8 million people are sending the same email to the same people. That's anything that's overused is polluted. I mean, once upon a time, the email marketing worked really well, and then spam came along. Once upon a time, LinkedIn emails, could be used well if you knew what you were doing, but now 9 out of 10 emails are spam. A lot of things work first time, but that doesn't mean that if everybody starts using them all the time, they're going to work in every circumstance. And the problem with SDRs, with emails, with LinkedIn emails, is the more people that use them, the more used to them people get, and the more devalued they get. So there are times when people doing an SDR role can still work. But when 8 million people are calling you and you're getting all these spam calls, what do? You stop answering the phone. When you get spam emails, you stop reading your emails, or you put in spam filters. So anything that's overused or overgeneralized just stops working.
Or they're trying to scale and turn up the volume by turning up the quantity, which, I mean, judging from what you've just been saying, and we've been doing this course together, but that's almost the complete opposite thing that you should be doing for C-level. You talked about being highly specific about them, researched, to the minute side, that this is for you. I can't write this email to anybody else or talk to anyone else about it. It is your company I'm on about here.
Well, I mean, when everyone does something, you should do the opposite, because there's a much better chance of it working. Because you stand out, if nothing else. I mean, just imagine if you wanted to get married and have children, and you decided you would do it in scale, and you would market yourself to more and more women, so that you could eventually, and then whichever ones responded, clicked on your email, you follow them up, saying, "Oh, I noticed you clicked on my email. Would you like to have children?" It wouldn't work that well, would it?
I think there is actually quite a famous sales trainer that advertised for a wife on a job board or something. I don't know. I'm gonna have to check that. That
was Gary Halbert, and it was a brilliant ad, but it was very, very specific about what he wanted. I've got a copy of it. It was also incredibly politically incorrect.
We better not go down that route then. I was worried when you started talking about the leaders.
It was very funny, but it was very specific about what he wanted. But he was still looking for one person,
Gary Halbert, I'm gonna look that one up. Okay, so if they zig, you zag, is kind of what you were saying. What else can you share that would be good for somebody that's serious about selling at sea level? I mean, you've already shared a load of stuff here. What other things they just need to be aware of?
Well, look, the most important thing is you need to know what's important to them. You need to know what their priorities are. We talk about pain, and pain's useful, but we've got lots of pains. I've got a bit of a pain in my knuckles now. I had a skin cancer cut out today, and but a bit of a cold. And I had COVID a couple of weeks back. I mean, we've all got lots of pains, but which is the pain that's going to kill you tomorrow? That's the one you're going to focus on. If you've got COVID, you're not going to worry about a broken toenail, and if you've got, if you've just had a heart attack, you're not going to worry about the fact you've got a broken finger. So it's not just a question of pains; it's a question of priorities. So you need to understand what the priorities are of the people that you're selling to. And that's going to vary upon what position they're in, because different people have different perspectives depending on whether they're a CFO or a COO or a customer service manager or whoever. It's going to depend on what industry they're in, because different industries have different issues. Coal miners have very different issues to solar wind operators at the moment, and certainly different issues to software as a sales companies. So that depends upon the industry you're in, and it also depends upon the specific company you're in, because one bank might have a very different situation to a different bank in a different country or of a different size. So everyone's priorities and perspectives are based upon a combination of all of those factors. And you need to it's detective work, but it's not difficult detective work if you know how. But if you don't know how, and if you're trying to find the killer elevator pitch that will turn everybody on, well, it ain't going to work.
Yeah, so I mean that's going through loud and clear. This being specific, doing the work on these particular opportunities which you've picked correctly, and then sort of putting in the hard yards, or getting someone to help you put in the hard yards to then do a really good targeted job.
And I mean, the thing is, if you're depending on what you sell, obviously everything depends upon what you sell and to whom. I'm working with a client at the moment that sells accounts payable and accounts receivable and order management automation, software as a service. And different companies everyone's got accounts payable. The ones that have got order management have probably got accounts receivable and claims and returns. But there's some companies have got both, some companies have got one or the other. And some companies are really big, and they're worth the amount of revenue they get out of them is worth putting in the level of attention I'm talking about, because they're worth 100,000 a year for 5-10 years. Others aren't as worthwhile, so you don't put in as much effort. You still need to understand what they care about and how to approach them, and then the rest you sort of do your digital marketing, whatever, and if they come to you, you qualify them. So you don't use this approach for every single company you're going for. You use it for the ones that are your top priority. We really need to get to them, because if we do sell to them, we're going to make a heap of money, people.
And so you have to, kind of almost a different sales skill itself, but then you have to schedule your time, manage your most precious resource appropriately, because you've got to put that work in to be able to get those outputs to deliver effectively on that, don't you?
Yours or someone else's time, because I'm a great believer in getting the right person for the right job. People that are good at opening conversations on the phone and understand business and can talk intelligently to a senior business executive about particular issues aren't necessarily people that are going to manage the entire sales process. There might be. You might be a full service, but you can have an SDR equivalent. I've got a friend of mine who does cold calling, but he's not stupid. He understands business problems. He can talk at a C-level executive level, and when he's done the things that he has to do to identify a sales opportunity, he can hand it off to a subject management expert who works the entire deal, liaising with him. Because the other thing is, if you've got other people doing stuff for you, you need to communicate. The person doing the research, the person doing the calling, the person that's managing the deal when there is a deal, they can be different people, but they've got to talk. Got to get together every week. What have you learned? What's happened? How are we going to do this? One of the big problems we've got is this myth of the salesperson as the Lone Ranger going out there killing all the baddies by himself with the occasional bit of aid from Tonto. But it's not. Sales should be a team effort. And it's often a pass-the-parcel effort. Marketing does their work, and then they chuck a few leads over the fence to sales, and sales sort of get hit on the head by someone. and then they follow up with 3 or 4 and they find the rubbish, so they stop. And then marketing whinges at sales because they're not following up the leads, and sales whinges at marketing because the leads are rubbish. And you've got to communicate.
Brilliant. I mean, we could talk.
Obvious.
Well, we have talked for hours and hours on this. No, we have proof in the pudding, and so actually it's quite an easy way for me to round this out, because usually I say to people, well, I know where we can find you. We can find you on LinkedIn, and when I offer the option for any other information you'd like to share, I guess we're going to point people towards the Selling at C-Level course, are we not?
Well, let me use that as an example, right? When you and I got together, I know my strengths and I know my weaknesses. Okay, I've got 50 years of experience in business. I've got 35 years of experience in sales and probably 20 years in experience of selling to senior executives. Plus, I've been a senior executive, so I've got a fair degree of expertise, and I can talk this stuff till the cows come home. But I am, to use a technical term, as we say here in Australia, rat shit at organisation and at technology, and I have a low attention span. So I needed someone that's got all of those things in spades, and you have. So that I think we're a good team.
I think we're a good team. Hopefully, people will agree when they see what we've produced. I'm proud of it. I think it is going to make a difference for a whole lot of people. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes. A link to your LinkedIn as well. And
I will do a plug. It costs anything from $1,000 to $5,000, depending upon how you who you believe and what you sell, to get a meeting. If you're wasting half of those, it's going to cost you a minimum of $2,000 for a successful meeting, more like $5,000 or $10,000. If you buy our program, you will get a lot more meetings, and it will not cost you $10,000. It'll cost even less than that.
Oh, a plug with a little bit of curiosity at the end. Love it, Steve. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us in podcast format as opposed to training recording format. Look forward to our next conversation, which will be putting more of the modules together. Thank you for listening to the Sales Today podcast with me, your host, Fred Copestake. I hope you've enjoyed what you heard today. If you did, please get in touch and hit subscribe. And remember, you can take the Collaborative Selling Scorecard for free to check out how your sales approach works in today's environment. You'll find it in the show notes.